Lena had lived alone for years. Her small cottage nestled at the edge of a forest was her sanctuary. The silence of the woods, the gentle rustling of leaves, and the stillness of the night were all she knew. After the tragedy that took her family, she had cut herself off from the world. She didn't mind the quiet, it was easier this way. But on some nights when the wind howled through the trees and the shadows seemed to stretch a little too far, the loneliness crept in. She had built a life for herself, a simple one. Her days were filled with tending to her garden, reading books, and preparing meals. The routine was comforting, but it also reminded her of the emptiness she felt inside. She longed for something, though she couldn't name it. Maybe it was companionship, or maybe it was the warmth of another person, someone who wouldn't leave her when the night grew cold. It was a late autumn evening when the knock came. Lena was sitting by the fireplace, the crackling fire her only company. The wind outside had picked up, and she pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. The cottage was warm, but the storm outside made the world feel far away. The knock was sharp, sudden, and out of place. At first, Lena thought it was the wind playing tricks on her, but then it came again. 3 quick raps on the door. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? Cautiously, she stood up and walked to the door. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of the doorknob. She hesitated. The door was solid, and she wasn't used to visitors. But something about the urgency of the knock made her stomach twist with unease. She opened the door just a crack, and then she froze. A man stood in front of her. He was tall, towering over her by a good foot. His face was pale, his features sharp and striking like something carved from marble. His hair was dark, nearly black, and it fell to his shoulders in messy waves. His eyes, they were the most unnerving part. Deep, almost black, with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her very soul. There was a wildness to him, an energy that didn't belong to the quiet, peaceful world around her. He was bleeding. There was a deep gash on his side, and blood was dripping from it, staining the front of his dark clothes. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his posture was stiff as though standing was a struggle. "Please," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I need shelter." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. Everything in her screamed to close the door and run, but she couldn't move. Something about him held her in place, not fear, but something else. Something that made her want to help him. Who are you?" She finally managed to ask, her voice trembling despite herself. "I'm sorry," he replied. His words slurred slightly as if he was fighting to stay awake. I'm not human. But I mean you no harm. Please let me in." Lena swallowed hard, her mind racing. She'd heard the rumors. Whispers about creatures that roamed the earth, things that weren't quite human. But those were just stories, weren't they? Myths passed down from one generation to the next. She had never believed them, but now, standing before this man, all her doubts melted away. There was something in his eyes, something primal and otherworldly. She glanced quickly over her shoulder, her hand still on the door, unsure of what to do. Then she made a decision. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't need to be told twice. He staggered past her, almost collapsing into the cottage as if he could no longer stand. Lena quickly shut the door behind him, locking it and securing the heavy wooden bar across the top. "Thank you," he murmured, collapsing onto the nearest chair. His face was pale and his breath was shallow. Lena felt a surge of compassion. She had never been one to leave someone in need. She had helped countless animals and neighbors over the years. Despite the pain she often felt inside, this man or whatever he was needed help, and for some reason she felt like it was her duty to offer it. She knelt beside him, gently touching the wound on his side. His skin was cold to the touch, colder than any human's should be. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the first aid kit she kept in the corner. "I'm going to clean your wound," she said softly. Not sure if he could even hear her. He nodded, his eyes half closed, but his lips curled into something that almost resembled a smile. "Thank you," he whispered again. "I'm Victor. What's your name?" "Lena," she replied, her hands shaking as she poured antiseptic onto a cloth. For a moment there was only the sound of the fire crackling and her soft movements as she tended to him. She kept her eyes focused on the task at hand, trying to push away the thoughts racing through her mind. This wasn't normal. He wasn't normal. Yet there was something magnetic about him. something that drew her in despite all the warnings her mind tried to give her. She couldn't explain it, but in that moment all she wanted was to help him. Once the wound was cleaned and bandaged, Lena sat back, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked at Victor, who had closed his eyes, his breathing slowly evening out. "You should rest," she said, her voice soft. "You've been through a lot." Victor didn't respond immediately. For a long moment it seemed as though he had fallen asleep, but then his eyes opened, and he looked at her with that same intense gaze. "I didn't want to trouble you," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "but I had nowhere else to go." Lena nodded, feeling an unspoken understanding between them. He didn't belong here, and yet he did. She felt it deep within her, a connection she couldn't explain. "You're not troubling me," she said quietly. "You're welcome here." Victor's gaze softened for a moment, and then, to her surprise, he slowly stood up, his legs unsteady as though he was still recovering. He walked toward the fireplace, and for a brief moment he seemed to be lost in thought. Lena didn't know what to do. Should she ask him more questions? Should she ask about the wound, about who or what had done this to him? But something held her back. There was an air of danger around him, something that warned her to tread carefully. Still, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. Before she could speak, Victor turned around, his eyes locking onto hers once again. "I'm not safe here," he said, his voice low. "Not for long." Lena felt her heart skip a beat. She didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said it left her with an uneasy feeling. "Why?" she asked, barely able to find her voice. "Because I'm not like you," Victor said, his eyes darkening with a mix of sadness and regret. "And the ones chasing me will not stop until they have me." Lena felt a chill run through her. The warmth of the fire seemed to shrink away, leaving only the heavy weight of his words. She opened her mouth to ask more, but before she could, Victor collapsed back into the chair, his body finally succumbing to the exhaustion of the night. Lena stared at him, unsure of what to do next. Her heart raced, and she felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. She had no idea what the next morning would bring, but one thing was clear. Her life was about to change forever. The night passed quietly. Lena stayed awake for most of it, her thoughts racing. The wind howled outside, shaking the windows, but inside the fire burned brightly, casting warm shadows on the walls. Victor slept soundly in the chair, his breathing deep and steady. His injury, though serious, seemed to have stopped bleeding, and his pale face showed no sign of pain. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something about him wasn't just strange, but dangerous. She kept stealing glances at him. The mysterious man who had come to her door in the dead of night. His stillness and sleep only made him seem more otherworldly. She couldn't understand it, but a part of her felt a pull toward him, as if her very soul recognized him. Around midnight, Lena finally couldn't stay awake any longer. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them again, the first light of dawn was creeping through the curtains. Her gaze fell on Victor, who was still in the same position, though his chest now rose and fell with a calmer rhythm. Lena stood up carefully, her legs stiff from sitting for so long. She walked to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, trying to push the odd events of the past night to the back of her mind. She boiled water for tea and sliced bread. As she worked, her thoughts kept drifting back to Victor. He was a vampire. The stories she had heard growing up flashed in her mind. Stories of monsters who fed on humans and could not be trusted. But everything about him told her otherwise. His vulnerability, his gratitude, and the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. None of that fit the image of the creatures she had heard about. She tried to focus on making breakfast, but her hands shook as she set the table. She hadn't felt this unsettled in years. When she returned to the living room, Victor was awake, sitting by the fire. His dark eyes followed her as she approached. There was a quiet intensity to his gaze, but his expression was softer than it had been the night before. "You're up early," Lena said, forcing a smile. Victor nodded, his voice quiet. "I've been awake for a while. You should rest." "You've done enough for me." Lena hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She had felt responsible for him, a part of her wanting to care for him even though she knew so little about him. She set the food on the table, then sat across from him. "You're not like what I've heard," she said, looking into his eyes. "I thought vampires were monsters." Victor's lips quirked slightly, though his expression remained serious. "I am a monster, Lena, But I'm more than that too. I've been alive for a long time and I've seen things that would break your heart. I've hurt people. I've done things I regret. Lena frowned, her heart aching for him. She didn't know what kind of life he had lived, but the pain in his voice made her want to understand. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched his. You don't have to be what you were, she said softly. You're here now, and you're safe. Victor looked down at her hand, then back up at her. His gaze softened. For a moment they were both silent, as if the weight of the world had settled between them. I don't deserve your kindness, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lena shook her head, her heart full. Everyone deserves kindness. Victor sat back in his chair, his expression clouded with something Lena couldn't read. She had no idea what it was like to be him, to carry the weight of centuries on your shoulders, but she could tell that he was wrestling with something, with himself, with his past. I've spent so long running from my own demons, Victor said, his voice low. And now, I don't know what to do. I'm here with you and I don't want to hurt you, but I'm afraid of what might happen if I stay. Lena's heart raced. You're not a monster, Victor. You're just lost, like the rest of us. Victor's gaze softened, but his expression remained troubled. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know who I am. Lena took a deep breath and stood up, moving toward the window. She looked out at the forest, the trees standing tall against the morning sky. Maybe I don't know everything about you, Victor, but I do know that you're here and you're not alone anymore, and I won't let you go. Victor remained silent for a long time, his eyes never leaving her. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. You shouldn't say things like that, he warned softly. You don't know the danger you're in. Lena turned to face him. I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The silence was thick with unspoken words, but neither of them knew how to bridge the gap. They had come from different worlds, yet here they were sharing the same space. Their fates tangled together in a way neither of them had expected. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door. Lena's heart leapt into her throat as she froze. Victor's eyes shot wide open, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Stay here, he commanded, his voice a low growl. Lena nodded, fear creeping up her spine. She knew what was happening, and they had found him. His enemies had come for him. Victor stood swiftly, his movements graceful and dangerous. Before Lena could react, he was at the door, his hand hovering over the handle. He looked at her one last time, his expression pained. You don't belong in this world, Lena, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You should stay away from me. But Lena didn't move. She stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't care about that, she replied, her voice firm. I care about you. Victor hesitated for a moment before he opened the door, revealing a group of vampires standing outside. Their eyes gleamed with malice, their posture cold and predatory. Lena's breath caught in her throat. But even as the danger grew closer, she didn't move. She wasn't going to run. Victor stepped in front of her, his body tense, ready to protect her. We don't have to fight, he said, his voice dark with warning. But the leader of the group, a tall vampire with piercing red eyes, only smiled cruelly. You don't get to decide that anymore, he said. It's over, Victor. Lena's pulse raced as the scene before her unfolded. This was it, the moment she had feared. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She was ready to fight for him, for them. Victor had already made up his mind. He wouldn't let them take her away.